She had learned the hard way that exhaustion doesn't ask for permission. It simply takes you when you have nothing left to give. The office was silent at 2:17 a.m. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like it pressed against the walls and settled into the bones of anyone still awake inside it. Emma Carter was the only one left to feel it. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keyboard. The glow of her monitor cast a pale blue light across her tired face, while the rest of the floor sat in darkness. Rows of empty desks stretched behind her like a reminder that everyone else had already gone home hours ago to warm beds, quiet houses, and people who waited for them. She stayed because she didn't have that luxury anymore. Somewhere across town, her 5-year-old son was asleep in a small apartment with a babysitter she could barely afford. He was running a fever that had scared her enough to check her phone every 10 minutes. Even now, the email open in front of her read, "Final warning," in bold letters. The subject line sat there like a threat she couldn't ignore. Her boss's message was short and cold, telling her the report had to be finished by morning or she shouldn't bother coming back at all. Emma swallowed hard as she blinked against the sting in her eyes. She forced herself to focus on the numbers, on the rows and columns that had started to blur together sometime around midnight. Losing this job wasn't an option. Not with rent due in 10 days and a stack of medical bills sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. Not with a child who depended on her for everything. So she kept typing. She typed even when her wrists ached, even when her shoulders burned from hours of sitting hunched over the desk. When her vision doubled for a second, she had to close her eyes just to steady herself. Her phone lit up beside her with a soft buzz that made her heart jump. Her hand reached for it instantly, as if pulled by instinct. She exhaled when she saw it was just a text from Mrs. Alvarez saying his temperature hadn't gone any higher, that he was sleeping, and that he had asked for his mom before drifting off. That single sentence cracked something inside her. She wasn't there. She was here instead, chasing numbers and deadlines in a building that didn't care if she broke under the weight of it. She pressed her lips together, setting the phone back down. "Just a little longer," she whispered, though no one was there to hear it. Her voice was barely more than a breath. She leaned closer to the screen, trying to push through the fog in her mind. But the words refused to stay still. Her head dipped for a second before she forced it back up, blinking hard and shaking it slightly, as if she could wake herself by sheer will. Exhaustion wasn't something you could negotiate with, however. It crept in slowly and quietly until her fingers stilled over the keyboard, until the numbers on the screen lost all meaning. The weight of everything she had been holding in all day finally pulled her under. Her body gave in as her head lowered onto her folded arms, her cheek pressing against the cool surface of the desk. The faint smell of paper and coffee lingered in the air. Within seconds, she was asleep. It wasn't the kind of peaceful rest people dreamed of, but the kind that came from having nothing left. Her breathing was soft and uneven, a tear still drying against her skin under the dim light that flickered above. The office remained unchanged and unmoving, as if the world itself had decided to pause for just a moment around her. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that echoed down the empty hallway. It was a sound that felt too loud for the hour. Daniel Hayes stepped out with the quiet confidence of someone who was used to owning every space he entered, even when no one was there to see it. His footsteps were measured against the polished floor as he loosened his tie slightly. The long day stretched into something that had never really ended, just shifted into a different kind of exhaustion, one that came from decisions instead of deadlines, from people instead of numbers. He rubbed the back of his neck briefly as he walked toward his office, already running through the next morning's schedule in his mind. Then, something small and out of place caught his attention. A faint glow came from the far end of the floor where every other light had been turned off hours ago. He slowed, his gaze narrowing slightly as curiosity replaced routine. No one stayed this late unless they had no other choice. That was not something he ignored anymore, not after everything he had learned the hard way about what pressure could do to a person. He changed direction without thinking, his steps quieter now as he moved toward the single illuminated desk. When he got close enough to see her, he stopped completely. The sight of Emma Carter was frozen in a moment that felt too personal to witness. Her head rested on her arms, her hair slightly out of place as if she had been fighting sleep for far too long before finally losing. The computer screen still glowed with unfinished work, numbers and charts scattered across it like evidence of a battle she had not quite finished. For a second, Daniel did nothing. He just stood there, taking in the details that most people would have overlooked. He noticed the faint crease between her brows even in sleep, the way her fingers were still curled as if they had been typing moments before, and the tear mark that had not fully dried on her cheek. Something about that stopped him in a way he didn't expect. It wasn't just exhaustion he was looking at, it was responsibility. It was the kind that didn't turn off when the clock did, the kind he recognized more than he liked to admit. He let out a slow breath, glancing briefly at the empty office around them before stepping closer. His movements were careful now, deliberate, as if he were afraid of breaking something fragile. His hand reached for his suit jacket without hesitation. The fabric was still warm from his body as he draped it gently over her shoulders, adjusting it just enough so it wouldn't slip. His fingers brushed the edge of the desk as he made sure she stayed covered. She didn't stir. She only shifted slightly into the warmth. Her breathing evened out in a way that made the room feel different somehow, quieter, softer. Daniel straightened slowly, his eyes moving back to the screen where her report sat unfinished. The cursor blinked in the middle of a sentence like it was waiting for her to come back. He frowned slightly as he read through the numbers. His focus sharpened as he recognized the structure of the work, the precision in it, the kind of attention to detail that didn't come from someone careless or unprepared. He reached for the mouse almost without thinking, scrolling through the document and scanning the sections she had already completed. Each one was more thorough than the last. He shook his head faintly, a trace of disbelief crossing his expression. This wasn't the work of someone falling behind. This was the work of someone being pushed too far. That realization settled heavily in his chest as he pulled out the chair beside her desk and sat down. His presence was quiet but firm, as if he had made a decision he wasn't about to change. His eyes moved between the screen and the sleeping woman beside him. The faint hum of the building was the only sound left in the background. For the first time that night, Daniel Hayes stopped thinking about the next deal, the next meeting, or the next expectation. He simply stayed. Sometimes the most important thing a person could do was not fix everything, not solve every problem, but refuse to walk away when it mattered most. The cursor blinked steadily on the screen, casting a faint rhythm into the stillness. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing with focus while he traced the logic of Emma's work line by line. The numbers aligned with a clarity that told a story he understood too well, a story of someone who had done everything right and still found herself on the edge of losing it all. He exhaled slowly, his fingers resting against the desk as he noticed the timestamp on the document. Entries were made at 11:42 p.m., then 12:15 a.m., then 1:03 a.m. Each one was spaced just far enough apart to reveal the struggle behind them, the pauses that came when fatigue took over and had to be pushed back again. Something tightened in his chest at the quiet evidence of it. Effort like that didn't show up in performance reports. It didn't get summarized in quarterly reviews. It lived in moments like this, unseen, unacknowledged, and often too late to matter. He shook his head faintly before glancing down at her again. Her breathing was soft, her shoulders slightly hunched even under the weight of his jacket, as if her body hadn't yet learned it was safe to rest. He reached over without thinking, adjusting the fabric once more so it covered her properly. The movement was careful and brief, his hand pulling back as soon as it was done. But his gaze lingered, drawn to something small near the edge of her desk. It was a worn photograph partially tucked beneath a stack of papers. He hesitated for a second before sliding it out just enough to see. His expression shifted as the image came into view. A little boy with a wide smile missing one front tooth stood in what looked like a small park, his hand gripping Emma's tightly. Both of them were caught mid-laugh in a moment that felt real in a way nothing in this office ever did. Daniel studied it quietly. The faint crease in the corner of the photo suggested it had been handled often, carried, maybe even depended on. He set it back exactly where it had been, his jaw tightening slightly as the pieces settled into place. The late nights, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation, none of it was random. None of it was careless. It was survival. That understanding changed something in him. It shifted the situation from a problem to be solved into a person to be protected. He leaned back in the chair, his gaze drifting once more to the screen, then to the clock on the wall that now read 3:08 a.m. It was the hour where even the city outside seemed to pause, traffic thinning, lights dimming, the world holding its breath before morning began again. Daniel made a decision without announcing it, without needing to justify it. His hand reached for his phone as he unlocked it, scrolling briefly before typing a short message to his assistant. Reschedule the 8 a.m. meeting. Move it to tomorrow. No explanation added, none needed. He set the phone down just as quietly as he had picked it up. His attention returned to the report in front of him as he began reviewing it more carefully. He wasn't doing it to take over or replace her effort, but to understand it. He wanted to make sure nothing she had done went unseen. His mind worked through the figures with practiced ease while the soft hum of the building continued around them. Minutes passed without urgency, without interruption. Then, the faint sound of a phone vibrating broke through the quiet again. It was sharper this time, more insistent. Daniel's eyes moved immediately to Emma's phone as it lit up beside her hand. The name on the screen glowed clearly in the dim light, Mrs. Alvarez. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze flicking to Emma, who was still asleep and unmoving. He reached out and gently slid the phone closer, watching it vibrate once more, then stop, then start again. Something in that persistence told him this was not a message that could wait. He made a choice, simple and steady, as he answered it. His voice was low and calm when he spoke. "Hello, this is Daniel Hayes. Emma can't come to the phone right now, but I'm here with her. Is everything all right?" The question lingered in the quiet space between two lives that had just begun to intersect in a way neither of them had planned. On the other end of the line, there was a brief pause. It was the kind that carried worry in its silence before words even arrived. Then a woman's voice came through, slightly breathless, careful but urgent. "Emma, I'm sorry to call this late, but his fever just went up again. It's 102.4 now, and he keeps asking for you." Daniel straightened in his chair. His gaze instinctively shifted to Emma as she slept beside him, her face soft in the dim light, completely unaware of the world tugging at her from somewhere else. He lowered his voice even more, steady and composed. "Thank you for calling. You did the right thing. I'm with her right now. She's safe, just exhausted. Can you tell me if he has taken any medication in the last 4 hours?" There was a slight rustling sound, as if the woman was adjusting the phone while checking something. "Yes, I gave him children's acetaminophen about 2 hours ago, but it doesn't seem to be helping much." Daniel nodded even though she couldn't see him, his mind already moving through the next steps with quiet efficiency. The same calm precision he used in boardrooms was now redirected towards something far more human. "All right, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to arrange for a doctor to come to the apartment right away. You won't have to take him anywhere tonight." The woman hesitated, clearly surprised. "A doctor? At this hour?" Daniel's tone didn't change. It remained grounded and certain. "Yes, at this hour. Please stay with him, keep him comfortable, and make sure he drinks small sips of water if he can. I'll handle the rest." There was another pause, softer this time, filled with relief instead of worry. "Thank you. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel allowed a brief, reassuring warmth into his voice. "You're doing exactly what you should. I'll call you back in a few minutes with an update." He ended the call gently, setting the phone down with care. The quiet returned to the office, but it felt different now. It was no longer still, but holding the weight of something that mattered. He looked at Emma again, really looked this time. He noticed the faint tension that still lingered in her brow even in sleep, and the way her hand rested near the edge of the desk, as if she had been reaching for something she couldn't quite hold on to. For a moment, something unfamiliar pressed against the edges of his usual composure. It wasn't discomfort or hesitation, but something closer to responsibility, the kind that didn't come with contracts or expectations, just a simple understanding that he could help, and therefore he would. He reached for his phone again, dialing a number from memory. The line connected after only a single ring. "Dr. Patel, I apologize for the hour, but I need a house call. Pediatric, high fever. I'll send you the address." His tone was quiet, but carried the weight of someone who was not used to being refused. The response on the other end came quickly, professional, and alert. Within seconds the details were arranged, the address forwarded, and the arrival time confirmed. Daniel ended the call just as smoothly as he had started it. He set the phone aside before leaning back slightly in his chair. His eyes drifted once more to the report on the screen, but his focus didn't settle there. The situation had shifted, expanding beyond spreadsheets and deadlines into something that couldn't be measured in numbers. He exhaled slowly, his gaze softening as it returned to Emma. Without waking her, without disrupting the only rest she had managed to find, he reached over and moved a stray strand of hair away from her face. The gesture was brief, almost instinctive, before his hand retreated again, resting against the edge of the desk as he resumed his quiet watch. The clock now read 3:46 a.m. Each passing minute carried them closer to morning, to consequences, to explanations that would need to be given. But none of that seemed urgent right now, not compared to the simple fact that somewhere across the city, her child was being taken care of. And here, in this quiet office, for the first time in what felt like a long time, she wasn't alone, even if she didn't yet know it. The faint vibration of his phone broke the stillness again, softer this time, almost respectful of the quiet that had settled around them. Daniel glanced down at the screen, recognizing the number immediately before answering without hesitation. Yes, his voice was low but steady. The response came quickly, professional and calm. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Daniel nodded slightly. "Thank you," he said simply before ending the call. He set the phone back down as his gaze drifted once more to Emma, still asleep, still unaware of the invisible thread now connecting this office to the small apartment across the city where her son lay sick. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to sit in that connection, to feel the quiet weight of it. It wasn't something he could quantify or manage with a contract. It was something that simply existed, fragile and real. He leaned back slightly in the chair, his eyes lifting to the window where the city stretched out beyond the glass. The skyline was softened by the deep blue of early morning, lights flickering in distant buildings where other lives carried on, other stories unfolding in ways he would never fully see. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction as the urgency of the night shifted into something steadier, something grounded. When he looked back at Emma, he noticed the smallest change, a subtle movement as she shifted under the weight of his jacket, her brow tightening slightly, as if her mind was beginning to surface from sleep. Caught between rest and reality, he leaned forward instinctively. "It's okay." His voice was quiet but present, barely above a whisper, not meant to wake her, but to meet her if she did. Her fingers moved faintly against the desk, a small, unconscious gesture that spoke of how deeply she had needed this moment, how far she had been pushed before her body finally insisted on stopping. Daniel watched her carefully, not intruding, not rushing, just there. His presence was steady in a way that didn't demand acknowledgement. After a few seconds, she settled again, her breathing evening out as the tension faded from her face. He allowed himself a small breath of relief, though he hadn't realized he had been holding it. His attention shifted back to the desk, to the report that still waited unfinished, the blinking cursor unchanged. He reached for the mouse again, not to take control, but to understand where she had left off. His eyes moved across the screen with quiet focus as he traced the final section she had been working on. The numbers aligned with a logic that spoke of effort and precision. He nodded faintly, recognizing the structure, the intent, the way she had built her argument through data even while exhaustion pulled at her. Without overstepping, without erasing her work, he made a small adjustment, a correction so minor it wouldn't change her voice in the report, only strengthen it. His movements were deliberate and restrained, as if he were aware that this was still hers, still something she had earned. When he finished, he leaned back again, his gaze moving once more to the clock, now reading 4:02 a.m. The night was thinning into early morning, the first signs of a new day beginning to press quietly against the edges of the sky. In that moment, Daniel realized something that didn't come from logic or strategy, something simpler and quieter. The decisions made in rooms like this, in hours like this, often mattered more than the ones made in boardrooms filled with people and expectations. Here, there was no audience, no performance, just a choice. And he had already made his, long before the sun had even begun to rise. The first hint of morning came quietly, a pale gray light beginning to soften the edges of the city skyline beyond the glass. Inside the office, that same gentle shift seemed to reach Emma before anything else did. Her breathing changed almost imperceptibly as the deep pull of exhaustion began to loosen its grip. Her fingers twitched slightly against the desk as if she were trying to find her place again in a world she had temporarily left behind. Then slowly, reluctantly, she stirred. Her brow tightened as awareness crept back in, confusion flickering across her face before her eyes even opened. Something felt different, unfamiliar in a way her body noticed before her mind could explain it. The weight resting over her shoulders, the warmth that didn't belong to the cold office air. When her eyes finally opened, blinking against the dim light, it took her a second to understand where she was. Her gaze was unfocused at first as it moved across the desk, the glowing screen, the scattered papers. And then she froze. Her body went completely still as she became aware of the jacket draped around her. Her fingers lifted instinctively to touch the fabric, her breath catching slightly as realization hit in pieces, not all at once. She pushed herself upright too quickly, the chair shifting faintly beneath her as she turned. Her eyes landed on the man sitting beside her. For a moment, she couldn't speak. There he was, calm, composed, exactly as she had seen him in meetings and company emails and passing glimpses in the hallway. Except now he was here, right next to her, at 4 a.m, in a moment that made no sense at all. Her voice came out softer than she intended, edged with confusion and something closer to panic. "Mr. Hayes." She immediately straightened, pulling the jacket closer around her shoulders, as if she could somehow undo the situation by fixing her posture. Her mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. People didn't fall asleep at their desks in front of the CEO and walk away from it without consequences. She swallowed hard, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she forced herself to meet his gaze. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I just needed a minute, and I must have." Her words stumbled slightly as she tried to gather them into something professional, something acceptable, but they felt thin even to her own ears. She stopped, her chest tightening as she glanced at the screen, at the unfinished report that now felt like proof of failure instead of effort. Her grip on the jacket loosened just enough for her to realize she was still wearing it, the fabric heavier now that she was aware of it. She hesitated before starting to slip it off. "I shouldn't have," she added quietly, her voice dropping as the weight of everything settled in at once. The long night, the missed calls she hadn't heard, the fear of what this moment meant. Daniel didn't interrupt her immediately. He didn't rush to fill the silence with authority or judgment. Instead, he watched her with a steadiness that didn't match the tension she carried. His expression was composed, but not distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "You should keep that on. It's still cold in here." The simplicity of the statement caught her off guard, halting her movement as she looked at him again. She was unsure if she had heard him correctly, because it wasn't what she expected, not what she had prepared herself for. He continued without raising his voice, without shifting into anything that resembled reprimand. "You finished more than enough for tonight." Emma blinked, the words taking a second to register because they didn't align with the warning email still echoing in her mind. She shook her head slightly, instinctively resisting it. "No, I still have the last section. It's due this morning. I can't." Her voice faltered as she reached for the mouse, her hand unsteady as she moved it, determined to pick up where she had left off as if the last few hours hadn't happened. But Daniel's hand moved just enough to gently stop the motion. Not forcefully, not in a way that asserted power, but in a way that asked her to pause. She did. Her eyes lifted to meet his again, uncertainty replacing the urgency for just a moment. He held her gaze steadily, his tone quiet but firm. "Your son is being taken care of." Everything in her expression changed. The words cut through the noise in her head with a clarity nothing else had managed. Her breath caught as fear replaced confusion. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely there. Daniel didn't look away. "His fever went up, but a doctor is with him now. I made sure of it." The room seemed to shift around her as the meaning settled in. Her hand fell away from the mouse completely as she stared at him. The world narrowed to just those words. Somehow, in the hours she had been asleep, something far more important than work had been happening, and he had been there for it. And she hadn't even known. For a moment, Emma couldn't move. Her mind struggled to catch up with what he had just said, the words echoing in a space that still felt half asleep. Her heart began to race as reality rushed back in all at once. "A doctor," she repeated softly, almost to herself. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the desk as she tried to steady her breath. "You called a doctor?" Daniel nodded once. His expression was unchanged, as if what he had done required no explanation, no acknowledgement beyond the simple truth of it. That quiet certainty was what broke through the last of her disbelief. This wasn't something imagined, not something she could dismiss or misunderstand. It had happened while she was here, while she had been asleep, while she had failed to be where she should have been. The thought hit her hard, a wave of guilt rising so quickly it left her breathless. "I should have been there," she whispered. Her voice was unsteady now, the composure she had tried to hold slipping as her eyes dropped to her hands. "He asked for me, and I wasn't there." She shook her head faintly, the words catching in her throat as she tried to push them back. But they came anyway, raw and honest in a way she hadn't planned. "I was here, worrying about a report." The weight of that realization settled heavily in her chest. No matter how necessary her job was, no matter how much she needed it to survive, it didn't change the simple truth that she hadn't been there when her child needed her. Daniel watched her quietly, not interrupting, not dismissing the feeling even though he understood it. This wasn't a problem to solve. It was something she had to move through. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, grounded in a way that didn't challenge her emotion but steadied it. He wasn't alone. Emma looked up at that, her eyes searching his face as if she needed confirmation beyond the words themselves. He held her gaze without hesitation. He had someone with him who cares about him, and now he has a doctor, and he's being taken care of. The simplicity of that statement did something her own thoughts hadn't been able to do. It shifted the focus just enough to let her breathe again, even if only slightly. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping a fraction as the tension eased, though it didn't disappear entirely. Some worries didn't leave that easily. She pressed her lips together before asking, her voice softer now, but steadier. "Is he okay?" Daniel nodded again. "The doctor said his vitals are stable. The fever is high, but manageable. They're monitoring him closely." Emma closed her eyes briefly at that, relief moving through her in a quiet wave that left her feeling both lighter and more exhausted at the same time. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not just relief, but something deeper, something that carried a quiet disbelief. She was still trying to understand how this man, her CEO, someone who existed in a world so far removed from hers, had stepped into her life in such a personal way without hesitation, without expectation. She glanced down at the jacket still draped over her shoulders, her fingers brushing the fabric as if grounding herself in the reality of it, before looking back at him. "You did all that," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement she was still trying to accept. Daniel's response was simple, almost understated. It needed to be done. There was no trace of self-importance in his tone, no suggestion that she owed him anything, just a quiet acknowledgement of a choice he had made. That, more than anything else, made it harder for her to find words. Gratitude felt too small, too insufficient for something that had reached into the most vulnerable part of her life and steadied it without asking permission. She swallowed, her voice softer now, almost fragile. "Thank you." The words carried more than politeness, more than obligation. They carried the weight of a night she hadn't fully lived through but would never forget. Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting it without drawing attention to it. His gaze shifted briefly to the window where the first faint hint of sunlight was beginning to edge over the horizon, the city waking slowly beneath it. When he looked back at her, there was a quiet resolve in his expression. It suggested this moment wasn't an exception, not something that would simply pass with the night, but the beginning of a change neither of them had planned, yet neither of them could ignore. The quiet between them didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, as if something unspoken had settled into the space and chosen to stay. Emma shifted slightly in her chair, her fingers still resting lightly against the edge of Daniel's jacket. She tried to gather herself back into the version of who she had been before this night unfolded. But that version felt distant now, like something she had outgrown without realizing it. She glanced at the clock again. The time pressed forward whether she was ready or not. "I need to go to him," she said. Her voice was steadier now, carrying a quiet urgency that had replaced the earlier panic. Daniel nodded immediately, as if that had never been a question. "Of course you do," he replied. He rose from his chair in one smooth motion, his presence shifting from stillness into action without losing its calm. Emma stood as well, though more slowly. Her body reminded her of the exhaustion she had tried to ignore. Her legs were slightly unsteady for a brief second before she caught herself. He noticed, not in a way that made her feel watched, but in a way that made her feel supported. "Give me a minute," he said, reaching for his phone again. His tone was practical and focused. Within seconds, he was speaking quietly into the line, arranging something she didn't fully understand yet. While he did, Emma turned back to her desk. Her eyes fell on the report still open on the screen, the blinking cursor now a reminder of everything she had been trying to hold together. Instinctively, she moved toward it. Her hand reached for the mouse again because that was what she did. She finished things, she carried through. She didn't leave loose ends behind even when everything else in her life felt uncertain. Before she could sit back down, Daniel's voice came from beside her. It wasn't sharp, not commanding, but firm enough to stop her. "It can wait." She hesitated, her hand still hovering over the desk as she looked at him. The reflex to argue rose automatically because it had always mattered, because it still did. But something in his expression made her pause. It made her reconsider for the first time without pushing back immediately. "It's due this morning," she said quietly, the habit of responsibility still holding on. He met her gaze evenly. "And it will be handled." His tone left no room for doubt. Not because he was dismissing her work, but because he was removing the burden from her shoulders in a way no one else had ever done. Emma felt that difference. She felt it in the way her breath caught slightly before she let it go. For once, someone wasn't asking more from her. They were giving something back. She slowly withdrew her hand from the desk, stepping back as if physically letting go of the weight she had been carrying. Daniel finished his call, slipping his phone into his pocket before turning to her again. "The car will be here in 2 minutes," he said. Emma blinked, the words taking a moment to settle. "A car?" He gave a small nod. "You're not taking the bus this morning." There was no judgment in the statement, only a quiet understanding of what that would mean after a night like this. Emma let out a small breath that almost felt like a laugh, though it didn't quite reach that point. The situation still felt too unreal, too far removed from what she was used to. She looked down at the jacket once more before slipping it off carefully. She held it out toward him with both hands. "Thank you," she said again, more firmly this time, as if the words needed to carry everything she hadn't yet been able to express. Daniel accepted it without making a moment of it. He draped it over his arm as if it were nothing more than a simple exchange, though the look in his eyes said otherwise, something quieter, deeper, that didn't need to be named. As they moved toward the elevator together, the building began to wake slowly around them. Lights flickered on in distant offices, the faint sound of early arrivals echoing through the halls. Emma felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a complete change, not something sudden or overwhelming, but a small, steady realization that settled into place. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore, even if she didn't yet know what that meant. As the elevator doors closed and the city rose to meet them below, the night they had shared didn't feel like it was ending. It felt like it was quietly becoming something else. The early morning air felt different the moment they stepped outside. It was cooler, quieter, carrying that fragile stillness that exists just before the world fully wakes. Emma wrapped her arms lightly around herself as she followed Daniel toward the waiting car. Her mind was still catching up with everything that had happened in the past few hours. The weight of it settled in pieces rather than all at once. When the driver opened the door, she hesitated for the briefest second, not because she didn't want to get in, but because part of her still felt like she didn't belong in moments like this, in quiet gestures that came without cost or expectation. Daniel noticed, not with impatience, but with understanding. "It's just a ride," he said gently. His tone removed the distance she felt without calling attention to it. She nodded, stepping inside with a quiet, "Thank you." The seat was softer than anything she had experienced in a long time. The door closed behind her with a muted sound that seemed to separate her from the world she had been carrying all night. As the car pulled away from the curb and the city began to move around them, Emma looked out the window. Her thoughts drifted between relief and lingering worry, between gratitude and something she couldn't quite name yet. Beside her, Daniel remained silent. He didn't fill the space with conversation or ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. His presence was steady in a way that didn't demand anything from her. That, more than anything else, allowed her to breathe, truly breathe, for the first time since the night had begun. When her phone vibrated again, she reached for it quickly, her heart tightening before she even saw the screen. But this time, when she answered, her voice was steadier. "Hello." Mrs. Alvarez responded almost immediately, her tone lighter now. "The doctor is here," he checked him. "The fever is coming down slowly. He's resting now, and he keeps asking if you're on your way." Emma closed her eyes for a second at that, relief moving through her in a quiet wave that left her shoulders dropping, as if something heavy had finally been set down. "I'm on my way," she said softly. When the call ended, she kept the phone in her hand for a moment longer, as if holding on to the reassurance it had brought. Then she turned slightly toward Daniel. Her expression was calmer now, though still touched with emotion. "He's okay," she said. There was something in the way she said it that carried more than information. It carried gratitude, trust, and something deeper that hadn't fully formed yet. Daniel inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without making it heavier than it needed to be. "Good," he replied. For a moment, that was enough. Just that single word, grounded and certain. The car continued through the waking streets, the sunlight beginning to stretch across buildings and sidewalks. People stepped into their days unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place between two lives just hours before. As they neared her apartment, Emma felt a different kind of awareness settle in. Not fear, not uncertainty, but something steadier, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. When the car came to a stop, she hesitated again, but this time for a different reason. Her hand rested on the door handle as she turned back to him. "I don't know how to repay you," she said quietly, the honesty in her voice unguarded. Daniel met her gaze without hesitation, his expression calm but resolute. "You don't have to." There was no distance in his tone, no barrier of hierarchy or expectation, just a simple truth that stood on its own. Emma held his gaze for a moment longer. Something unspoken passed between them, something that neither of them tried to define. Then she nodded, a small, quiet acknowledgement of something she wasn't ready to name. She opened the door and stepped out into the morning, the cool air brushing against her face as she turned toward the building. Her steps quickened as she moved toward the one place she needed to be. As the door closed behind her and she disappeared inside, Daniel remained where he was for a moment longer. He watched the entrance with a stillness that held more meaning than action ever could. Because sometimes, the most important part of changing someone's life wasn't what you gave them, it was what you chose to stay for, even when they didn't know you had.